we've been having a lot of conversations, I guess, as people, as Christians, as Americans, or whatever the group you belong to is. However you identify that, we've been having a lot of conversations about things. They're very emotional conversations, and it's a wonderful thing to have conversation, but I think my observations are that not a lot of these conversations have been overly productive. I'm not saying they have been entirely without productivity, but it seems that a lot of them have been counterproductive, and I want to share some rules I think that would be good. These are just my interpretations of things that would be good rules, but just three quick ones. First of all, I think one of the problems with our conversations have been that they've been entirely, or at least the majority of them, have been over social media. And social media conversations have a couple of problems with them. One of the problems is that we don't have the ability to interpret tone of voice, and we don't know sarcasm is something, how is something intended, and we don't have facial cues. We don't have a lot of things that really good conversations require, and so we misunderstand a lot of the things that other people are saying, and we communicate things we are trying to do because we don't have those necessary tools that are part of normal conversations. And by normal conversations, I mean conversations that have taken place, for the vast period of human history. The second thing is that there is a feeling of anonymity, in a sense, in social media. The things that we do, the things that we say are all, behind a screen, and so it's pretty easy to hit send, and you're just sending it kind of to a nameless, faceless wall. And a lot of the things I think that we would naturally filter out if we were having that in-person conversation doesn't get filtered out. We don't, that doesn't sound like something I would say to that person if I was, we just have their little circular avatar to look at, and not the real person. So that's the second thing that I think is a problem. We also have a human tendency, I think, when in those difficulties where we're not communicating, to interpret the worst. To interpret the best of somebody is something that takes practice. That's why we have to be told to believe the best. God says that's what love is. Love believes all things, love hopes all things. Love is something that's practiced. It's not something that comes natural to us. That's why we have to be commanded to do it. There are elements of love that come natural to us, I suppose, but we have to be trained to believe the best in other people, because it's not our natural inclination. We assume that somebody's saying something against us, or what have you, or some personal thing is intended, and so social media only magnifies that tendency, because we don't have the context of the quick comment or the 144 characters or what have you. And finally, the other thing is that social media conversations are different than all other conversations we have, in that they're extremely public. And we approach them that way. We just throw out whatever it is I want to say, and we're doing it for mass consumption. And conversations usually, you might be sitting around in a group of 3, 4, 5 people on some occasions, having a small conversation, but that is different, and there's a different mentality that you have than when you are having this mass shotgun approach to a conversation where you just kind of spew out whatever it is, and unfiltered, and no one can limit the number of characters you have or what have you. you can post like 7 paragraphs consecutive if you want, and it's a different, it feels different, in other words. So the first thing I would say in these, we want to get something across, get it across in person. Now you can do that through social media by instant messaging somebody, but things on walls, and you'll notice that people get into your conversation that, like, you don't know, like a friend of somebody else's sees something, and all of a sudden they're commenting on your thing, and you're like, I didn't even know who you are. It's not productive. So the second thing I think is important for us to do is to know that the purpose of your conversation, maybe we need to stop, just even in our in-person conversation, say, what is the purpose of this conversation? What are we trying to do here? There are two basic types of conversation in terms of productive ones. And this would go for like a meeting. If you were having a meeting at work, there's 2 basic types. There would be the informative type of meeting, and there would be a solution finding meeting. Okay, and there's a difference between the two. Informative would be like if your boss comes and says to you, okay, this is what we're doing. This is an informative meeting. The decision's been made. The solutions are there. We know what the solutions are. This is what you're going to do. That's an informative meeting. The fact-finding one would be like, we don't know what to do. We need to find a solution to this issue. So we're going to fact find, and we're going to then come up with resolutions and action plans and goals and all sorts of things. That's a completely different time. That's open-ended. We don't know what we're doing. So in our personal conversations, if I'm approaching a conversation from a different standpoint, let's say we're having a conversation about something, and you want to share your personal story with me. It's just an informative meeting in that sense. And I'm trying to convince you of something. Well, now I'm doing the persuading. I'm doing a solution finding thing. This is action we need to take. You need to agree with me. And I'm approaching things from a different we're not going to have a productive conversation because you're trying to inform and I'm trying to convince. And that's not productive. So we need to sit down and say, what are we trying to do? And quite frankly, we're not going to persuade a lot of people. And I know that's something. You're not going to persuade me. On 98% of the things that we're going to talk about, even if we were both trying to have a persuasive conversation, we agreed, okay, this is what we wanted. It's probably not going to be productive because I'm not going to convince you, and you're not going to convince me of 98% of whatever it is we believe. So is this really even entirely a productive thing? I'm not saying we shouldn't try to convince people of things that that we think are very important. But we do need to understand what our conversations are even centered around, the goals of them. What's going to make this a productive? What would make this productive for me to walk away and have? And if I'm not having a conversation that's directed in that, in that course, I'm going to go away feeling frustrated. No one wants to walk away from a conversation feeling frustrated. So know where you're headed. And the last one is, okay, let's say that we both agree that we're going to have a persuasive conversation. Well, there's rules for that too. And I think probably one of the things I want to do here in the future with some of these is to go through what is called logical fallacies. That's a phrase, you might have heard it before, maybe you know what they are. Some people don't know what that is. Logical fallacies there's a lot of types of arguments that we use in conversations where we're trying to persuade somebody of something, in which the arguments we use do not support the conclusion we hold. In other words, they don't logically arrive at what we're trying to accomplish. And so there's a lot of them, actually. There's a lot of logical fallacies, circular reasoning, and various ones like that. But if we're going to have a successful persuasive conversation, we need to do so using sound logic at least. That doesn't mean we're going to convince other people, but at the same time, if we use bad logic, then it only makes the matter worse. Things like personal attacks. Personal attacks are used frequently in our conversations where we're trying to convince, whether it be the person we're talking to or the person we're talking about. Well, this person believes this, and look what they did, and so that means they're wrong. Well, that doesn't support the thing. I want to go through a bunch of those. There's so many that, there's dozens and dozens of them, and I want to at least go through the major ones and try to identify, not just for our political or social conversations that are so popular right now, but even in how we convince people of biblical truth, I think is very important. There's a lot of bad arguing on behalf of God. You can be arguing a very accurate point, but do so incorrectly and end up damaging the point you're trying to make, using bad analogies or what have you. So in the result of this is that our conversations, we will end our conversations being more frustrated than we started. And of course, that's not what we want to have happen. Conversation is there to advance. So I would advise at least these three things: to know where you're going in your conversations, to have productive conversations by means of knowing, what the purpose is, and having them in person. Have your conversations in person, and try to reason, and not. There's so many things that we could say about conversations. I could go on for an hour, but I won't. I'll cut it off here. But certainly, be aware that we as Christians, especially, need to have productive conversations with the people around us, regardless of the topic.